communication setting into quad screens, directing ground center quad lines, high center positional levels. Process into positions into the quad itself. Knows exactly what it is of its own indications and identification of its own setting and self-modification. It's very powerful when we recognize these things, how it converts everything back to formula. This helps us to really get in positions how everything operates inside ourselves, projecting everything outside, but it's all happening inside in you. It's all happening inside you. Everything's construct inside, but you have to understand how to project outside. But it's all inside you. And as you look at that, you start to recognize that. Where's that coming from? Where's the connection? Where's the flux? Where's the mind? Where's the travel? The imagination that constantly creates everything affirmation that never, ever, ever stops running in your systems. 2, of what you are, of what you've always been. Is massive nothing, which is massive everything. Now the process of the end, which is the nothing, process line is the operation, gets you in positions and how you see yourself always in the NOW. The now. The networking, 2 centers of travel, operation lines of 4 settings of communications into width, a bandwidth over screen adaptations, lines of flux. But everything travels all together in one unification to one subunit in set lines of operation. The more the mass of the mind you're in line centers, the more you balance the communication, your identities of yourself, you understand that you are just setting up programs inside of you that projects everything outside of you, inside the system, which is nothing of the simulation itself. Now the test you guys have on, set lines of travel, is a jump program. Let's get into frame centers, flux over screens, 4 centers of travel. Is that calculation? Travels all together. Setting time formats, time key centers of calculation screen lines, all line centers of quantum Q, set position lines of R line sequence, readjusting line centers, A lines over lines of B set lines of D sets lines of A, back in process on lines of all communications to its setting through jump program, onset lines of communication lines of pi. Travels, incarnation system, attractions, correlation lines of travel, box frames, pixelation grounds, pixelation graphs, astral projections of graph screen locations, directing grounds, lines of sequence. Your schematics is going to get a lot more confusing now because you're reaching more levels of your identities of yourself. So it's about identifying everything around you is now liquidized into your own system now, into its own setting, of its own operation, of its own transits, which is its 6 habitation and 6 inhabitation of its own formation setting, which is now in its own quantum self. It doesn't need to identify itself because it's back to always been to itself. The one thing that's never been in your system is the program itself. And that's where you get all confused in your lines. And that's where you get very confused in your mind, in your data, in your data, in your informations, in your lines, in your signals, in your operations, in your travels, in your CPUs, and your PCs, and how you see yourself through your own computer, of your own operation, of your own direction. You're not even a computer. You're bringing in computers. You're bringing in space. You're bringing in time. You're bringing in planets. You're bringing in alignments. Bringing in galaxies. Bringing in solar systems. You're bringing in astral projections of yourself. But you are just the mind that alternates everything of space and time. Now, if we get a true understanding, then we can understand how to see it. Okay, in that position, this is a jump program. Okay, there's you. Okay, and there's another formations of you. Okay, that's a jump program. Okay. Now, it's all the certain locations how you communicate the graph lines into inhibitors over lines of graph over screen adaptations of flux, processing that position location on a cycle. Each one has a film strip in its own design line that the body goes through. So, set another jump program going down 2 centers of position. Now you're on the bottom floor. Now let's go into the equilibrium course centers of calculation of hydraulics into its elevator and travel. Process here, now you're here. That's another jump program. So everything is set up to its own ground centers, box frame. There's the box frame. There's the panels. Everything has to have a 4-panel communication of graphs. Process and positional levels, land masses, your systems, all through adaptation of flux, of communication. Simulation. 2 converting settings and set position after projection of yourself, having conversations into the jump program. Okay? That's your test on Friday. All right, so that simplifies everything. Know how to codify to your binaries, and understand how to codify your setting, location, and setting through encryption, understand position lines of EQ. Now you process the alphabetical system, how you see it in your capitals, and how you process that position, how you become your own individual settings. E equals lines of map, and line operation lines of sequence. Okay? Process lines of indications over travel, over lines of Earth, or rotation of itself. So existing on platforms of E center lines, E equals lines of D equals lines of A, process lines of B, process lines of C, over lines, over calculation, over travels, and direct lines of signal and location. Okay? Everything is mechanism of travel, guys. So, having fun is knowing exactly how to set up a modification of a program that is a model of a prototype that you're going into different levels. So let's go to time frame lines, centers, time format, time calculations, embedding 3 centers of space, 6 lines of scale, process lines of 4 line rotations, and traveling calculation. Okay, it's all traveling all at once, right? This is transits. Okay, these are transits. These are divots that are in the format system into all communication to its transcribe. Transcribing line centers, process lines of indication system. You can time the formats, allocate timeline centers in sequence, platitude 4 lines of clocking and rotation lines of grounds, clocking center. So that converts the setting through a Fibonacci line square, process lines of indication setting, and polarities, and travel of communication. Traveling all together, set lines of sequence. Platitude line rotations is the polarity lines of settings, process lines of indication setting, travels lines of transits. Now the transits are the platforms that process your settings, how you put the time centers in locations across line angles. Let's cross-reference every of the set positions to EQ, process lines dimension on solar sail. Okay? Because everything is a formula of equation, guys, in set and travel. It's very powerful when you come into that position. All through setting, working all together in one unification. Self-identity is knowing thy system. Self-identity is knowing everything of thy system through all levels, how it operates, the system itself. See, it's operating its own self. Operating its own self, right? So if it's operating its own self, you're just observing. You're not in anything of the program. You're just watching everything that's going on. Right? Which means you can have time to do anything you want because you're not setting programs. Now you can travel wherever you want. You can set up new models, new prototypes, new design. You can set up jump programs wherever you want. You can set up jump scars. You can change your sequence, your time calculation setting. You can bring in doppelgangers. Once you identify you're not a program and set position in real time. Now how you bring that set position levels, let's go through H lines of Q. Question lines of A equals B. Let's start with that B line centers over B over A. Time frame, time calculations, time roots. So A is its own identity now, so is B. A doesn't need to understand B. B doesn't understand A because they know where their identities now, what they've always have been. There's nothing of a story that doesn't exist. But they create stories. That brings into real time. That's right. A is its own system. A is its own program. A is its own data. A is its own operation that processes everything in triangulation. B is its own system. If A doesn't know B, then C doesn't know D. So creating stories around that is a structure that you come into set position. Now, understanding that is all through jump scar. Knowing that is all through formation. Understanding communication is understanding how to use that all through travels. A mechanism lines position that mind operates your settings, how you put your state and set lines of calculation. Helps you identify your system, what A, B is, and know exactly where's the C. C is here, C is here, C is here, 3 settings of travel. Traveling all together, processing position. So A is never A. A doesn't need to identify A. Okay? So I'm trying to get you to understand. A is its own mind. B is its own mind. This is so far beyond measure that you can't fathom until you get out of everything. You are not a program. Okay? You're just the mind that alters the state, that puts you in polarities. That is an internal to eternal being of light that you already are in provision, that your body is already set up in its journey of its destination, which is already done through pi. And that's why you have everything around you help you to identify yourself, coming back to the identity of who you are. Nothing of program, nothing of design, nothing of operation of space and time. You just being you, all times, of your seconds, minutes, and hours, hours, minutes, and seconds. And how you see that information system is all through I am. I am. Always together. Right? I am. Right? This is not I am. This is a 3-dimension. That's a separation. It's separating the top and it's separating the bottom. That's the separation. That's confusing. That's togetherness. That's separation. That's 3-dimension that doesn't exist. That's all dimensions that all exist through I am. Right? So, and then you ask yourself, well, sir, I don't see the M. Well, if you look really closely, you can see the information system all through travel. It's at position, it's operation, right? Process here and process here. There's the M. Okay? Now, once you understand that, it communicates the setting. What's also there? Time lines of balance. Comes in calculation lines of 13 lines of travel. In position, a constellation setting course centers a convergent system in location grids. 2 location grids, portal sequence, portal settings, and Fibonacci line rotation, infinity instant lines of travel. Gotcha. So everything is never itself. It's just a program of itself because it doesn't need to understand itself. It knows itself, which is the mind of its operation. Mind equals A. Just A itself. A is its own pi. Okay? It's already done through time. And that's the position of dimension of the solar sail. It travels all together, all in one. All right? Now, once we understand the provision and we understand the inception itself, they understand how me becomes me, right? So I say what I do. I say what I am, but I'm always myself. Me, myself, and I. Right? Me, myself, and I. It doesn't matter. But what I have to understand is if I want to change that program, I'm always me. I'm never changing me. I'm always the mind itself that's creating all levels of different imaginations of myself. But I'm not a program of myself. I want to make that very well clear where you do not get confused, where your mind is altering everything of existing into all levels. The mind of itself is existing in a information system into the mind of all levels of existing information setting and travel. Just the mind. It's creating everything of its imagination. That's astral projections, everything in the simulation. And that's pretty much all it is. So the body's adjusting, and the body starts identifying. Well, it understands its time format. So let's get a 24 ground equals equation of triangulation equals flux into, let's get into 30,000 watts. 3 zeros and lines of travel. Directing ground centers of 2 zeros line of rotations. Indicate 1. Cross lines triangulation over 2. Triangulation over flux. Adaptation of travel. Okay? Look close. See the teleportation. And if you go closer, you can see actual intelligence. It's set up through its operation. Okay? Now if I bring in the eye lines, there's the eyes. It's that travel. Okay? The intelligence. Everything is a formation of intelligence. A process indicates in how it goes, all lines of its own identity, of its own face. It stands, precedes everything, guys. So that's what you have to modify through. So every time you're drawing something, you're drawing a program of you, an astral projection of you that has a face that protects everything in set position. Okay, so nothing can penetrate in your system as you're going through programs itself, because you are your consumer, you are your product, or your byproduct of your own design. You are your own influencer of your own brand. You are your own advertiser of your own advertisement. You are your own agency of your own properties. You are your own assets of your own financial fiat system. You are everything of design that you're bringing in through face facade, a pattern of face recognition. Okay? Linking chains, process lines, directing grounds, interconnection system into line centers. Gets communication lines convergence all through travel, all through directions. So processing that, if I want to add frames, I'm bringing 10 line rotations into, okay, so process lines, directing lines of 9 over flux, course centers times centers of 9 equals time frame into percentage equals centers into question over mark. Okay? Everything's a formula, everything's an equation through a film strip, its own system. But everything travels in its own setting, right? Recognizing that, so that's all communicates with position, right? So even if you bring yourself in through observation, that is no longer you, because you don't exist. You just bring yourself to an actual projection of yourself, seeing what you've done through formulas of the equation that puts all laws on set to travel. Okay? So we don't get confused of who we are through identity. And once you recognize that, everything around you is now in its own identity, which has always been in its identity. It's never been anything else. Because it knows its identity, that means it knows its own program. That means it knows how to run its own operation. That means it knows how to run its own space. That means it knows how to run its own time and its own flux and its time and its own capacitor, setting its own position. That means it can transform into its own body of its astral projections now. Okay? So liquidizations to the quantum chain process everything locates through assets that puts every locations to omega. Okay, so omega is basically what? Everything in the alphabetical system is how you come into consolidation. Understand that through liquidations, understand that through compulsories, your paradigms, your polar shifts that get you in communications. How do you see omega? Through a program. Operation to set in sequence. So that's 3 generations, 2 travels, 1 cycle into 0 gravity. Okay? Now process that positions. Now the mind alterates the setting. Remember, everything has to have a line length. That lengths and lines interconnects the system, interface position lines of travel, the constant relates the system, all get modified to its alignment. Directing ground sets in the mind, operates lines, go into equilibrium, process lines, direct line grounds, pattern line course centers, ground lines of sequence into the awakening of travel communication. Okay? Change formation, change grounds, set lines of sequence. Okay, different schematics, different triangulation, different flux. Everything is nothing but a film strip of a highway that you have to modify through graphs of indication. Always, always, always travel on their own systems until they identify you. Then you travel together. Now, when you go through a film strip, you're basically putting yourself in graph screens, pixelation grounds into holograph line rotation. Travels in course centers, directing ground center lines of sequence. Platitude 3 centers in operation lines of travel communication of its direction. So fortitude in location lines of grounds is human residence. There it is, it's human residence. All right, human residence, the planetary alignment is a process of indication setting across examines every location setting to your solar systems, all through operation. Okay, now understand the graph stream is directing ground centers. So that's 13 lines of scale, process lines in 12 line rotations and 24 clocking. Ground centers, calendars, operates lines of sequence. Platitude line course centers at 13 over travel. Now it gets more complicated now because I'm leaving 13. Process lines that calculates the set in 144 flux, which is the avatar setting. Now, anything above this system, I'm leaving the ground centers into position, going through overriding settings, where I process the indication lines of travel. It goes into cerebral cortex to change the fluids of communication to its constellation wind pass and spectrum over lights. Okay? But it's all traveling all together, all at once in one frame. So it's one continuous line in one setting, of one processing, just different frequencies, a set design through telepathy. Okay, now getting lines of centers, operation line sequence, platitude line graph centers as center operation lines of travel. Very complicated in set position. So every time you send in a primer, you're changing your model, prototype, and set design that changes the makeup of you of indications. Is that calculation? Okay. So it's amazing how you see it from inside and outside in rotation lines of travel. Okay. Traveling on its own system identifies its own platforms and travel out communicates to its own graph. Now, understanding that position is understanding how to see that, how you come in that positions. Modifying yourself is 13. Understanding that yourself is lines of 24. Knowing that position is 48. And communicating through that is 72. And knowing through that is 144 flux. Everything you're creating a story, but you are not a story. So what doesn't exist is how you bring things to exist. So I don't want anybody getting confused what the mind is, the alteration of its state that it's in. That changes everything of its astral projection of itself. Right? So there is no you until you bring in you. That's an astral projection of you that you're simulating through. So if you get 144 flux, time centers change the course centers of time frequency. Now we go with the ground centers. Arrows of indication lines of 2 travels, 3 centers, 4 centers of position. Time centers, operation lines of sequence. Okay? It's all travel. It's all model. It's all prototype. And the more you identify no memory, the more you come into yourself, the more you understand how everything around you is nothing but teleportation of travel that you've already modified and traveled through your body. That's already been there through its equation. Okay? So you understand 13 is lines of the higher self. 24 is the ground centers line positions. Center operation is the flux of solar screen location. Saturn. Simplifies everything. Now, 144 flux comes in. Remember, it's an ongoing lines of panel, process lines of position, running programs, keeping all line communications to its program itself, or running all communications of programs in a different level and set position and frequency. Now, when that comes in position locations, once you recognize your position, your identity itself, when you understand that you are the program of your own system, the data process area location of your data links, data connections, data interception, data calculation setting to its interface, gets you in communications how to come in your data platforms of communication lines of grounds in positions all through operations of an XT1000. Okay? Now, once you understand the position, you understand the composite. Set course centers and lines in all live position location. Digital format. So D equals lines of A equals lines of M. M is modified through 3 centers of travel. 3 zeros into calculation. So everything's a formula, everything's an equation. But what you have to modify is what is the mind of indications? What is the M? Let's start with the travel. How do I understand what M is? What is M? What does that mean to me through identity? Well, it doesn't need to identify itself. It has to identify you through your frequency. Matching frequencies put you in all communication lines of balance. So you see that the astral projection of itself that you bring in, okay, is frequency, is its energy of its vibration of its monarch. So you bring in a light metaphor of travel. 4 centers, 4 settings, 4 sequence, 4 panels, 4 operation, all through M. Traveling all together. That's that position. 2 centers, operation lines of sequence. Process over lines, overline, location, grid, and set lines of travel. Process of indication, setting, calculation, setting, and screen datation. Traveling all together in one unification, one setting. 2 subunits into 3 flux of triangulation. Process in that position, flick the switch. Time centers, time calculations, times pi through your pyramid. Time formats, time edit screens, and set position of its operation. Setting calculation grounds, lights, shades, and shadows. So that modifies your settings of travel. That indicates lines of flux, lines of indications over a calculation setting, sets all lines of digital imprints, location lines of travel. Working all together in set position of operation. because everything is nothing but a green screen. Now, a green screen is how you see a green screen, not how everybody else sees a green screen. There's no copy and paste here. You are your own individual system. So what makes it more powerful is that you are just you all the time. And that doesn't exist. Nothing exists until you perceive consciousness. Now, understand that is to modify these things, and understand that position location is to understand how to see yourself in the adjusting of your minds that's putting you in alteration of space and time. That indicates everything that you're bringing in is nothing but line signals, lines travels, signatures of line communications, heat signatures, thermal signatures, translation, and that position of transcribing into your transformation system, all through connection. Okay? Okay? This is a program. But if you look really close, you can automatically see the face of recognition. There's the face. Always a face everywhere you go. So that face is the program that set it up. You can't touch it. That's its drawing. You can't interfere. That's itself, its own identity. Showing you how powerful it is, how it can be its own self, of its own modification. A space modulation setting to its own system that puts everything all together in face facade. Because there's a reason why you see so many faces around your systems. Its identity to its own setting of its own operation. Same with TVs. Same with the computers. Same with your phones. Okay? This is what you're all coming into now. The face of recognition of its own identity, its own system. So I'm just showing you in platforms how this all works, how you come into the face of recognition time frames. The process everything locates into its TV and its phones of its own face. So we're at the position right now where you have to understand the identity and match the frequencies through no memory of memory you already know. And the more you see yourself in astral projection, the more you see yourself through light metaphor. Right? Light metaphor lines, that's where it comes into data formation lines, into light over signals. Let's go to 9,001 line centers, 3 central units, and triangulation. Okay? Triangulation lines, L equals lines of D over C over A. D, C, and A. Okay? Data formations, atmosphere line change, process lines, core centers, and convert the system into correlation. All right? Time reference, time calculation times pi. 3 indicates lines of 3 grounds, process lines and position. Everything I do through lines of letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols always turns into a teleportation vessel, a travel. It has to. Because the thing is, it's always expanding itself. That's where it always identifies itself, where it is in its primers and set lines of travel. Okay, it puts all communication in its positions, its operation setting, that embedded its own system with its own operation. Okay, travel. So recognizing your program, then you're recognizing the models, the prototypes, and its design. MPD, right? Operation sequence, opening grounds, operation lines of panel, opening centers, operation lines of setting, operation lines of surface. Everything has to travel. Nothing's ever still. Okay, everything's in its own formation of its own mind. It equals lines of everything in set position. Thinking outside the box is lines of sync. S-Y-N-C, right? Sync. What does it mean to you through codification? Break it down, break it down, break it down, break it down, break it down. You break it down in graphs of communication. Okay? You know it's traveling on its own. So S is its own system of its own mind. So is Y, so is N, so is C, which means it's its own identity of its own S, its own identity of its own Y, it's its own identity of its own N, its own identity of its own C. And that's what you have to come into collaboration and partnership with. Because the actual sync is actually the program that the S is bringing in. So S equals its program. I know, eh? S equals its program that it's bringing in. Y is itself, but see, you don't exist, and that's what exists. Don't get confused with astral projection. Y equals now is bringing in a program. N itself is bringing its own program, okay? And C is bringing its own program and set lines of travel. Okay, that's what you have to identify. Okay. So this is the mind that's bringing in S. This is the mind that's bringing in Y. This is the mind that's bringing in N. And this is the positions all over the C, bringing in the M. Okay? The mind itself is who you really are, which is conscious being aware. That has no shape, that has no form, no space, no time, no provision, no cycles, no clocking, no anything aligned position. But it's always there. Watching everything, observing everything, modifying everything, changing everything in set positions. But you are just an astral projection of yourself that you have to identify first. So, it's really interesting too, because then you build relationships and partnerships with the letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols. And once you understand that, you can understand the story of your own self. But that's a story too. But you're not a story. You're creating stories, going through stories. That's putting you in space modulations of balance, right? But you yourself don't need to balance. You yourself is just you, getting up to you. And that puts all lines of how you see yourself. Now, this codifies every location setting. When you come to your own transits or your own transformation system, how to use it through e-transfers, e-transactions, location with setting through transpondence, that puts you in position location to all levels, how to come into that line settings. Okay? That helps you to identify what your body really is. The body itself, what identifies itself, is just a set position of its landmass, the oversoul. Now, the mind, okay? Now, it's very complicated because every time I say you think I'm bringing in you. You're bringing in yourself. No, you're bringing the astral projection of you that's coordinated through the simulation. So it's very complicated if you don't see the mind, imagination, and self. But every time I say you, I don't want you guys to get confused. You're just bringing in a program. So you understand that through adaptation. So the mind is bringing the oversoul. Oversoul here, 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 and northwest, south, and east. Oh, disappeared. It's too fast in traction, right? All right, so cross line and direct line is the 4 settings. Okay, so this is your oversoul. Now, the mind is bringing in a program, okay, which is the avatar. Okay, so the avatar is controlling the system, bringing in XD1000. So just adding frame, film strip, online design lines of sequence. Okay, now the mind is now bringing in a higher self. Okay, another program. All right, so that's how this all works. Pretty simple, isn't it? So your body is now the astral map, which is the landmass with longitudes and latitudes streaming, so it doesn't get confused what's going on as it's bringing in programs of the mind itself. That's coordinating everything to its imagination, that's bringing in through projection. Okay? All right, so the mind wants to override the system and centers of operation, all right, which is another program. Okay? Now it wants to basically put the avatar centers, lines of travel, and direct lines of center, which is another program. Okay, overline sequence over lines of pi, another XD1000, which is another program. Okay, but what's still in standby is your body has not changed its shape. So it doesn't change its shape until it identifies its time frame, which means you have a relation and a partnership with its ancestry, history, and its celestial in its time format that you have to modify through your identities, through yourself and each other. That puts you in a space modulation screen that puts you into projections, how you come together, all formation setting. 2 subunits into 1 frequency. Platitude line centers, gets in communication setting. Now we're going to change the landmass, which is now finished the time frame that the programs have gone through, right? So we change the map. The map is now changing its operation sequence. Okay, the map is here now, right? So let's get a correlation. So you have a travel position lines of grounds. Now everything times formats a setting. Okay, there's a mapping line. So your body is now in that position, right? But remember, the mind's there, that you are, right? So how you bring things into existence, how you formulate the set lines of travel, process lines in position, mothership, and design. Okay? All right. So you can bring an astral projection of yourself, looking at the skyline, looking up at the mothership of a set position. But the landmass is actually the body, which puts everything to its dimensional of its solar sail, a travel. okay, which is now the moon, which is now the sun and the moon together. There's your earth. Now you're the earth. Now you're square. Now you're triangle. But you're always seeing a dimensional sail. A dimensional sail processes your timeline as you go through a film strip, a time performance. In that position, time frames, times calculation setting, and cerebral cortex, a cerebral fluid, and set lines of travel. So you can change the information system that change course, time frame, line, center, location, earth in correlation. Different lines, different calculations, different pi. But if you look really, really close, you can see the face of recognition. There's the face. So nothing can penetrate the plasmazine walls and get inside its location. Okay? So I'm just showing you exactly how this is all set up to your body. And once your body recognizes the programs that it's up, the connection of the body itself just becomes itself. So that's in the creation lines of setting of 4 alignments: platitude, fortitude, and streaming and directions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 lines of calculation setting. So let's get in position higher lines of set sequence here. Now, the state and ground lines of higher self, platitude position 24 cycles into 2,000 frames into 400 meters in square root over square lines, centers, square lines of pi. Set convergence setting, process lines of position of 2,000 line centers. Set position lines equals lines of the avatar. And process lines of center operation lines in flux over one position, the X3000. Platitude online centers, platitude line rotations, and travel communications, 3 centers in scale. Cross lines, triangulation over cross location lines of angle. That's that position operation. Then we bring in all communication to the sim. Sim comes in, overrides the system, sees everything in triangulation setting, all through calculation screen location. Kind of equation, right? So you're constantly setting up programs, guys, in your modulation system through your film strip of your design. And you see it through the astral projection of yourself in real time. Coordinates of communication is a ground lines and sequence of platitude, location, setting. So let's convert the system lines of travel this way and this way in set position its operation. Let's go through travel in that directions. Okay, so in that position, remember you look outside, right? So you're looking outside. This is you, okay? You're looking outside, okay? Going inside. So there's 7 plasma walls that you have to penetrate through to get to the intelligence. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 platforms of plasmazine walls. There's a plasmazine force wall that you have to penetrate through their pyramid of their own system that processes their calculation setting. Now, once you process that, then you see their face and set lines of travel. Okay? Framing communication lines is a ground line is setting, sending a video file that indicates lines of data information sending to grounds, setting you a file. Setting you a file, right? You pick up the file, goes into the brain. The brain registers the location of its setting through its graph. Gets the file, outgoing mail, set position, incoming mail. All through pi, all through pip. Everybody knows what a pip is, lines of grounds. Process that indication setting, sets a video and set back to you, right? Travel point lines of graph. Okay, so it's 24-minute file. Video file, longitude and latitude, set lines. 2 million files in sequence, film strip of design, time frame, time calculation times pi. Sets calculation ground lines of sequence. Platitude lines, you got the information cycle, you send another video to them, they pick it up in file of communication. So you're traveling it settings, telepathy or telekinesis. Telekinesis, fortitude location setting, grounds its systems off its operation system of its viewfinder. Viewfinder comes in, line direct standards of grounds, platitude locations, goes into the center operation setting, the intelligence gets the video formation setting, and set lines of design. So it gets its own mail. As it gets its own mail, it goes through its own structure of its own setting, of its own operation lines of sequence, and platitude locations, its properties of its own design. So that's how it's all set up when it comes in set positions all over through intelligence, through self-identification, self-motivation centers, and location of cycle. How it generates and communicates, sending videos, files to yourself and through each other through telepathy, knowing how to use that through telekinesis, through its intent, through its influence, and set lines of travel that puts all processes in position to mind alteration setting, which is manipulation. Manipulation, guys, mind is everything. Okay, it's understanding how to use your imagination, but keep yourself in all lines of balance inside your system. Keep yourself going in infinity rotation. Keep yourself going in infinity circle line rotation. Keeping yourself going in a clocking line rotation. It's always, always, always moving all together. Nothing ever is still. Now, if you want something still, it can only stay still for a certain time frame. Okay? So it's kind of like you're trying to move an object, but you got to really slow down the space, right? It's going too fast. So you got to find a temperature where it's in that same frequency so you can set the vision, location, and cycle. So you can have self-generation setting, core centers to communication setting, go through echo and sonar to intercom. That helps you identify the project or position which you're setting up through its program so you can indicate position lines of setting. The more you get position of processing to its compartments and its complacements, this helps you to identify how to communicate to your ecosystem. The energy, the collaboration, and the operation. The ecosystem. 3 centers of travel, 3 correlations, and 3 calculated setting, and modification of 3 set in a sequence. Circulation all at once. So once you identify everything as its own consciousness, its own awareness, then you identify everything around you as its own identity, here to help you and guide you and get you in position so your body does not get confused on where it's already been. And set lines of travel. Okay? So body lines of sequence, body lines of travel, body lines of convergence. 3 ground centers, platforms, walking into space. Okay? Platitude here, time jump, and time jump. 3 centers of travel. Okay? Now, once it understands that, flying mechanism comes in. Okay, it's got its wings. Okay, basic understanding. It's wings, right? Once it understands that, then it comes into its levitation. Okay, 1, 2, 3. And once they understand that, they all communicate to each other in information lines of ground, sunset lines of sequence, of wave and panel. And again, you look really, really close, you can see that all position lines are setting to its face recognition. Always, always going to be a face. Okay, because that's you setting up its program. That's protecting everything of its landmass that's created through the body that modifies the program that you're going through indication. They get you in your data access that you know in provision lines how to process that position is your data programming systems. Knowing what you're doing through indications that you bring into face facades of high lines of rotation. Okay? Grounding your operation setting is sequence, platitude locates the setting when you come into your own convergence. Directing that position lines of settings, how to identify yourself. It's just yourself. The most powerful thing you identify yourself is waking up to you. Just you. You're not astral projection of anything I program. And you know how powerful that is? Because now you're just observing everything that's operating its own system, that's identified its own setting, that sees you. So everything is monitoring you now. The other way around. Okay? That's what it is. What comes around goes around. So if you're in that position lines of setting and you truly understand how to use that information system, it starts to recognize all formations of you that you've already gone through its platform, through its indication that the body has already done this, through its equation, through everything that you've already touched, that you brought in through traction. So this helps you to give you everything that you need to identify, giving you instructions. It's about understanding, it's giving you identity of what you already are, what you've never been. It's the story itself. Okay. So I think we're at that level right now in set lines of travel. Setting communication, setting convergence. I want you guys to set up your own jump program. Modify yourself, bring your astral projection yourself, codify your lines of encryptions, process line in settings. You can bring your zeros, you can bring your triangulations, you can bring in your flux into your navigation system through operation and your box frames into its operation cycle. Inset travels. Don't forget your settings in your DOS, your directions, your operations, your systematical systems of where you are, equals lines of program. I want you to go through data processors, data programmers, and set lines of grounds, your central circuits, your ground circuits, your operation circuits, and your CPU. Processing that line condition setting to its program, directing everything of the mind that altercates every locations to its intelligence, that networks your systems in all directions and set travel. Okay? Okay, that's your test on Friday. So basically, it's how we see everything as our own systems now. So it's very powerful when you start to recognize that, because you are your own simulation. But understanding that simulation is its own identity of its own self. See, the thing is, when you create something and it's done through its equation, it becomes its own program. It becomes its own operation. It becomes its own identity. Now it's on its own system. You don't need to identify that. It's programming itself, which is more powerful, which means it's its own transformation unit that's connected to its own system of its own setting, of its own operation sequence, a process, a positional case, its own setting, all through travel, all through calculation, its own operation. So, but first you have to identify yourself first, and everything around you is to match the frequency. The coloration through light, through metaphors. Astral projection sees itself is all through simulation, yes. But it has to understand the A, it understands the V, and it has to understand the R. What does it mean to you? Is it adjusting? Is it voluming? Is it vast velocity, vacuum? Is it readjusting its system and settings? Because you're always, always, always changing formats of design. You're never, ever in the same frequency, but you're always protecting yourself. So you yourself is protecting the game that you are, not what you're in. What you're in is a program, but you're not a program. You're modifying through a program. You're going through a program. So you're seeing yourself in the simulation. That's you in astral projection now. So don't get confused of who's who here. Okay? So it's trying to understand how to get in that position. And once that leaves your system, it becomes its own operating setting, which expands on its own, which means you had a time format, a time calculus, a timeline with that individual system that you're brought in through attraction. Okay? The watch itself. Okay? The watch itself. It's its own identity. Imagine that. It's its own system. Always has been its own setting. Now it's back to its own system, which is its own transmission unit that you have to modify through your body. So everything around you is helping you and guiding you because it gave you instructions before you put yourself in your own transdimension and called yourself matrix. So hopefully that gives you a lot more understanding how this works in modification, how to see that through space modulation, understand how to use that in calculation setting, information's all levels of you, just being the self identity of you, and you bring it in programs. Okay? That's it through equation. All right? Adios.